The bride who stepped off the train and found only lies. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. The winter of 1885 had carved Frost Hollow into silence. Snow pressed heavy against storefronts, lanterns shivered on chains, and the train platform groaned beneath white drifts. When the last whistle faded, only one figure remained: Eva Marlowe, 23. A scarf too thin for the storm looped around her neck. The cream dress she wore had been meant for vows, not blizzards. She stood clutching a leather suitcase, the weight of her journey written in her stillness. The conductor vanished into the storm. The other passengers melted into homes and taverns. Eva stayed scanning the road for the man whose letters had promised her a life, Andrew Whitcomb. But the road was empty, the square hushed. A woman drew her curtain. Two men adjusted their caps without meeting her eyes. In the space of a few minutes, the dream she had crossed, states to claim, unraveled into something colder than the wind. Hoofbeats broke the hush, slow measured, certain. A black horse pushed through the snow steam, rising from its nostrils. On its back sat a tall figure in a frost-crusted trail coat hat, pulled low. The townsfolk shifted, making space without a word. Sheriff Wyatt Hale dismounted, his boots heavy on the planks. His presence felt like judgment, sharp and inevitable. "Name of the man you came to marry," his voice cut through the gale. "Andrew Whitcomb," Eva said, and already feared the answer. Wyatt studied her. "There isn't an Andrew Whitcomb in Frost Hollow." The words hollowed her chest. She steadied her grip on the suitcase. "Then I was deceived." "Looks that way," he said. "You're freezing." She straightened, though her knees wobbled. "I'm fine." His eyes flickered, unreadable. "Come to my office. We'll check the registry." The sheriff's office smelled of smoke and old ink. A small stove offered more symbol than heat. Wyatt hung his coat, motioned her toward the chair nearest the fire, then opened a worn ledger. "Where from?" "Missouri," she replied quietly. "I left my family behind." He nodded, scanning the pages. After a minute, he shut the book. "No Whitcomb, no Andrew, no one close." Her throat tightened, but the letters. "Generic as creek water," he said flatly. "You were lied to." The words struck harder than frost. She whispered, "Am I under arrest?" His mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Your only crime is believing too easily." It should have been mercy. Instead, it felt like a sentence. He opened the door. The wind clawed inside. "You're free to go." She walked out because staying meant pity. Across the street, she found a bench, sat, and let snow gather on her skirt. The platform lantern swung above her like a pendulum, marking the minutes of her mistake. She did not cry. She simply endured. Through the window, Wyatt watched. A voice in him said, "To leave her, grown women make their choices." But another voice, older and deeper, remembered a different winter, a different waiting figure. His wife Hannah gone too soon, because help had come too late. He saw the same silence in Eva's eyes, the kind that sets in when hope has already been ground down. He cursed under his breath, crossed the street, and dropped his coat across her shoulders. She flinched, then stilled. "Come back inside," he said. Her lips tinged blue parted. "Why?" "Because I don't have time," he muttered, looking into the storm to bury another fool who waited for someone who never came. Back in the office, Eva sat by the stove, hands knotted in her lap. Wyatt poured tea, set it beside her, then returned to his desk. He scratched at a blank sheet with his quill, though his eyes strayed toward her too often. She didn't touch the cup. Her stillness unsettled him more than sobs ever could. It was the stillness of someone long accustomed to being disappointed. At last he asked without looking up, "Where are your people?" "Back in Missouri." "Then why not return?" She fixed her eyes on the fire. "Because back there it's colder than this." He understood. Some homes kill quicker than storms. He went to the peg by the door, took down a key and set it on the table. "North cabin," he said. "First door on the left. 3 days, no more." Her head lifted slowly. Disbelief widened her eyes. He didn't meet them. 3 days, he repeated. "Don't make me regret it." Her fingers shook as she closed around the key. She rose, his coat still around her shoulders. The door clicked shut behind her, leaving him with the tick of the clock and the tilt of a photograph on the shelf, Hannah smiling faintly through the years. He leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and whispered to the empty room, "It's just a few nights. I'm not opening my heart." The north cabin waited under pine branches bowed with snow. Smoke curled from the chimney as if the place had remembered to breathe. Eva stepped inside, suitcase in hand, and paused. The air smelled of pine wood and something older memories, perhaps. From a side doorway came a small figure, a girl of 6 dark-haired eyes, too solemn for her age, holding a doll missing an arm. "This is Rosie," Wyatt said behind her voice, quieter than at the station. "My daughter." Eva crouched a little, offered a tentative smile. "Hello, Rosie." The girl only blinked before slipping away, leaving silence in her wake. Wyatt pointed up the stairs. "Your room first on the left." That night the house remained heavy with quiet. Over supper, little was said. Later, near the fire, Eva added a log and coaxed the embers to life. Rosie sat with her doll, silent but listening. "Would you like a story?" Eva asked. The child didn't answer, but her gaze lingered. Eva began anyway, her voice soft as falling snow, telling of a fox who lost its way in a storm and found home by following the stars. Rosie's lips twitched, almost a smile. Upstairs, Wyatt stood outside his bedroom door, listening. He told himself it was just kindness, temporary warmth, nothing more. Yet for the first time in years, the cabin's shadows seemed less sharp, as if winter itself had taken a step back from the threshold. Morning light slipped thinly through frosted panes, turning the cabin's floorboards into streaks of pale gold. Eva rose early, shivering as she stoked the embers, coaxing flame from stubborn coals. Her sleeves were rolled, her hands red from the cold. For the first time in days, she moved with quiet purpose rather than paralysis. Behind her, Wyatt's boots thudded on the porch. He carried firewood stacked against his chest, gloves stiff with ice. He noticed her bent at the hearth hair, loose, coaxing warmth into the room. Something stirred, familiar yet unwanted. He cleared his throat instead of speaking. She glanced up, only to slip on the rug. He moved instinctively. In 2 strides, he caught her by the waist, steadying her before she hit the stone. For a moment they hovered too close, her hand splayed against his chest, his palm warm against her side. Her breath caught, his jaw tightened. The moment stretched before he released her gently, stepping back as if burned. "Be careful," he said roughly. She lowered her gaze, cheeks flushed. "Thank you." Wyatt busied himself with the woodpile, pretending the thunder in his chest was just exertion. That evening after supper, Rosie tugged on Eva's skirt. "Sit by me?" she asked timidly. Eva smiled and gathered her close on the rocking chair. The child curled against her side doll, clutched in her hands. Eva hummed an old hymn voice, low sweet. Rosie closed her eyes, soothed. Wyatt returned late from patrol to find them asleep. Eva's head tilted back, Rosie nestled on her shoulder. He stood in the doorway far longer than he should have, a strange ache bloomin' in his chest. Something fragile stirred something he had buried with Hannah. The next morning, Rosie toddled over with a scrap of paper. Crayon lines formed 3 stick figures holding hands. "That's me, that's Daddy, and that's you." Her voice was shy, but sure. Ava's throat tightened as she accepted the drawing, smoothing her fingers over the childish strokes. Wyatt, seeing it, nearly dropped his coffee. From then on, Rosie called her Miss Eva, then Evie. The nickname stuck. Wyatt said nothing, but he heard the joy it carried each time Rosie spoke it. One night, Eva left something small on Rosie's pillow, a handkerchief pale blue, stitched carefully with the child's name in pink thread. Rosie clutched it to her chest as she slept. Wyatt noticed in the morning and lingered by the doorway, watching his daughter breathe easier than she had in years. He turned away quickly before Eva could see the expression softening his face. Life in town, however, was less kind. Whispers followed Eva whenever she ventured into the general store or past the saloon. People speculated about the unclaimed bride living under the sheriff's roof. Some voices mocked, others pitied, but none welcomed. Eva kept her chin high, though each word felt like a pebble cast against her back. One afternoon, she entered the fabric shop with Rosie, hoping to find thread for repairs. The bell chimed, and conversations hushed. Behind the counter stood Prudence, keen, corset-tight lips tighter. She eyed Eva with a predator's smile. "Well, if it isn't the bride who never got claimed," Prudence said, her tone sharp enough to cut. Eva stiffened, fingers tightening around Rosie's hand. "I do wonder," Prudence continued loudly, "what sort of woman chases letters from strangers, shows up in lace, then ends up under the sheriff's roof. Quite the actress, isn't she?" A ripple of laughter passed through the room. Rosie shrank behind Eva's skirts. "Please stop," Eva whispered. But Prudence only lifted her chin higher. "You don't belong here. Go back where you came from." Eva fled, tears burning Rosie in tow. Snow kicked up under their boots as they rounded the corner of the sheriff's office. Rosie began to cry, clinging to Eva's hand. Inside the shop, the door slammed open. Silence fell. Wyatt filled the doorway like a storm cloud. "You said enough," he told Prudence, his voice low and dangerous. His eyes swept the room. Every head dropped. "I don't care what letter she wrote or what story brought her here. She is under my roof, under my name. If anyone speaks of her with less than respect, they speak against me, and I don't take kindly to cowards hiding behind counters." Prudence paled. Wyatt left without another word, the echo of his boots silencing every whisper. That evening, Eva sat at the kitchen table, silent, hands folded in her lap. Wyatt placed a small paper bag in front of her. Inside lay blue thread and a pair of children's shoes. "I thought you might still want them," he said simply. Her eyes filled as she looked up at him. "You defended me." "I enforced what's right," he replied. "You could have let them talk. You didn't owe me anything." His gaze shifted toward the window, voice lower now. "I owed myself, because once I watched this town ignore someone I loved, I won't let them do it again." For the first time, Eva saw not only a sheriff's sternness, but a man's burden, raw and unguarded. She reached out, fingers brushing the thread. Something unspoken passed between them, steadier than words. That night, as the storm pressed against the cabin walls, warmth lingered not just from the fire, but from the knowledge that someone had chosen to stand with her. The snow had begun to loosen its grip on Frost Hollow. Icicles thinned to dripping points, and the streets no longer echoed with the endless crunch of boots on ice. Yet inside Wyatt's cabin, the changes were subtler, softer, marked by laughter where there had once been silence, by the faint hum of a woman's song at dusk. Eva had found her rhythm among them. She mended Rosie's sweaters, cooked stews from whatever provisions could be spared, and coaxed the girl into play. One afternoon, as Rosie sat cross-legged on the rug, Eva gently parted the child's dark hair and began braiding. Rosie beamed at her reflection in the window's frost, proudly tugging at the plait. "You look beautiful," Eva said warmly. "Do you braid yours too?" Rosie asked, tilting her head. Eva smiled faintly. "Not often, but I can try." That evening, Rosie's small voice whispered from her cot, "Can I call you Mama?" The question caught Eva off guard. Tears welled as she leaned close. "If you want to," she whispered. Rosie nodded once satisfied and curled into her blanket holding the handkerchief Eva had sewn. Eva sat long after her chest full of an ache she hadn't known she needed. Wyatt noticed too. He had seen the strap of Eva's dress fray from chores, the way she tugged it back into place with embarrassment. One night while she slept, he mended it with thread so fine it nearly matched the seam. In the morning, Eva blinked in a surprise when she found it repaired. At supper, she realized the old chair that had wobbled dangerously was suddenly sturdy again. She looked at him across the table, her expression soft. "You fixed it," she said quietly. He shrugged. "Didn't want you falling." "Or the chair," she teased gently. "Or the chair," he admitted, though his eyes didn't meet hers. It was in such moments that warmth threaded through the cracks of their lives. Not grand gestures, just a steady hand on broken things, a mended strap, a nail-driven firm. For Eva, it felt more like love than any gilded promise she'd carried east of the Mississippi. But then came the letter, delivered by a horseman one afternoon. Its neat script bore the name of her cousin, Daniel Carter, from Illinois. Her hands trembled as she read, "You deserve better than chasing false promises. I have room. I have work. Come home and you'll be safe." The words blurred as she lowered the page. Safe. It was everything she'd once prayed for, yet now it felt like a chain around her ribs. Wyatt found her standing by the window, the letter clutched against her chest. "Bad news?" he asked. Eva forced a smile. Just choices. That night, after Rosie had fallen asleep with her doll in one hand and the handkerchief in the other, Eva folded her meager belongings into her case. She moved quietly, heart pounding, determined not to disturb the fragile peace she had found here. Her fingers lingered over the child's embroidered cloth, unable to leave it behind. She had almost reached the door when his voice cut through the darkness. "Where are you going?" She froze. Wyatt stood at the foot of the stairs, half in shadow, his sleeves rolled, his jaw set. "I got a letter from my cousin," she admitted. "He offered me a place." Wyatt stepped closer. "Is that what you want or what you think you should?" Eva's throat tightened. "I don't belong here. That's not what I asked." Tears spilled before she could stop them. "I'm afraid," she whispered. "If I stay, I'll want more. I already do, and I don't know how to carry that without breaking." Silence stretched. Then Wyatt crossed to the cabinet near the fire and pulled out a small wooden box. He placed it in her hands. Inside lay a handkerchief, delicate, embroidered with a single name, Hannah. My wife made this before she passed, he said softly. She stitched her kindness into everything she touched. You reminded me of that. Eva's breath shook as she traced the threads. I loved a strong woman, once Wyatt continued. And now I find myself standing here. Not because you need me, but because I need to tell you this. I see you. Not as someone passing through, not as a burden. As a woman who stitched herself into our lives, thread by thread. Her eyes blurred. Wyatt. He stepped closer, his voice gentler than she'd ever heard. You deserve to be wanted because you are worthy, not because you're convenient or abandoned. If you leave, make sure it's your choice, not fear's. Eva's suitcase slipped from her fingers to the floor. For the first time since stepping off that train, she let herself hope. That night, instead of leaving, she unpacked quietly, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. When she laid her head on the pillow, the storm outside no longer sounded like exile. It sounded like a lullaby carrying her into something she dared to believe might last. The thaw of early spring was reluctant, creeping in by inches. Snow melted into rivulets that trickled down the cabin's roof, but the night still bit hard. Inside, warmth lingered more in presence than in fire. Eva's laughter floated at odd times while kneading bread, while teaching Rosie to stitch, while listening to Wyatt mutter about mules that refused to pull their weight. Slowly, the cabin became a place of life, not memory. But peace never comes without a test. It began with a cough, just a faint sound from Rosie's bed one night. Ava rose instantly, her instincts sharp. She pressed her palm to the child's forehead and felt heat burn against her skin. Wyatt, she whispered urgently. He was already pulling on his coat, fear flooding his face. I'll fetch the doctor. Eva caught his arm. Not in this storm. By the time you reach town, the fever will run higher. She needs us here. Wyatt hesitated, panic blazing in his eyes. 4 years ago, he had watched Hannah slip from life in the grip of fever. Now his daughter's skin burned with the same fire. She's just a child, he said hoarsely. She's strong, Eva countered. But she needs calm, not terror. Let me. Something in her certainty anchored him. Slowly he lowered his coat and sat beside the bed, though his hands trembled. For 2 days and nights, Eva never left Rosie's side. She cooled the child's skin with damp cloths, spooned broth between cracked lips, and whispered stories when the girl stirred in restless dreams. Wyatt did everything Eva asked, fetching wood, heating water, tending the fire. But he knew deep down that Eva carried them all through that storm. On the second night, Eva slumped into the rocking chair. Rosie's tiny hand curled in hers. Her voice was raw with exhaustion. Please stay, she whispered to the dark. I'm not ready to let you go. Dawn broke pale and trembling. Rosie stirred, lashes fluttering. Her cheeks, once ghostly, now flushed faint pink. She blinked at Eva, her lips parting with a dry whisper. Mama. The words shattered and remade the room all at once. Eva froze, then bent to kiss the child's hair, tears falling freely. Rosie sighed, drifting back into healing sleep. In the doorway, Wyatt leaned against the frame, shoulders sagging as if a great weight had lifted. His eyes glistened, though he said nothing. Something inside him broke open and bloomed. Later that morning, Eva stepped outside to breathe the sharp air. Wyatt sat on the porch, his face drawn with fatigue. She lowered herself beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. Finally, he reached for her hand, rough fingers tentative. I lost a family once, he said quietly. I thought duty was all I had left. But you, His voice cracked. "You brought warmth back into this place. You gave her laughter again, and you gave me reason to need to trust." Eva's throat tightened. "I was afraid to want this," she admitted. "But I do, more than I ever expected." He turned toward her, gaze steady. "Family isn't what you're born into. It's what you choose." For once, she didn't look away. She let her head rest against his shoulder, the silence between them no longer cold, but full alive. Word spread quickly in town. People noticed Rosie's sudden brightness, Eva's gentle presence beside her, the way Wyatt walked with less burden in his step. What had begun as whispers of scandal shifted into nods of respect. The sheriff's cabin was no longer haunted, it was a home. Still, gossip lingered, sharp tongues unwilling to let go. Eva braced herself each time she ventured into town, chin-high dignity intact, but Wyatt's presence at her side silenced most critics. His reputation carried weight, and when he placed his hand lightly at her back in public, it spoke louder than any defense. One evening, as they shared supper, Rosie set down her spoon and announced matter-of-factly, "We're a family now." Wyatt glanced at Eva, caught off guard. Eva's lips curved softly. "Yes, we are." Rosie grinned satisfied and returned to her soup as if she had settled the matter forever. That night, as Eva tucked her in, Rosie whispered, "Promise you won't go." Eva smoothed the girl's hair. "I promise." And for the first time in years, Wyatt allowed himself to believe in promises kept. Spring came late to Frost Hollow, creeping in with cautious steps. Snow thinned into rivulets that ran down gutters, and bare branches sprouted timid buds. Life returned slow but steady, like a child daring its first breath after illness. Inside Wyatt's cabin, warmth no longer belonged only to the fire. It was in Rosie's giggles, in Eva's soft humming as she stirred soup, and in the quiet way Wyatt's eyes softened whenever he looked at them. The town prepared for the spring festival, an old tradition of Frost Hollow, braided ribbons, pies cooling on windowsills, fiddles tuning in the square. For years Wyatt had stood at its edge, a man too carved by grief to join. But this time was different. On the morning of the festival, Wyatt dressed in a dark coat he hadn't worn since his wedding day. Clean shaven, his shoulders still broad, but the heaviness he had carried seemed lighter, as though grief no longer held every corner of him. Rosie skipped beside Eva, who wore a simple blue dress, with embroidery stitched by the child's careful hands. Her hair was braided with wildflowers, her cheeks touched by the warmth of the season. As they entered the square, conversations hushed. People stared not with malice now, but with something closer to reverence. The sheriff, who had once lived in shadow, walked with a woman and child at his side. When the music paused, Wyatt stepped onto the church steps. His voice was steady, not loud, but strong enough to carry. "She did not come from here." He began, his eyes fixed on Eva. "She arrived from a letter, from a broken promise, from miles of cold and fear. But she brought back something I thought this town and I had buried for good. Hope." There were murmurs in the crowd. Even Prudence Keene, once sharp-tongued, bowed her head. Wyatt turned back to Eva, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside lay a ring, simple gold reforged from Hannah's band, and a token Eva had carried since Missouri, past and future bound together. Eva gasped softly, hand flying to her chest. "It isn't a preacher's vow," Wyatt said quietly, his voice for her alone now. "And it isn't the way I plan to love again, but it is mine, and it is true. If you'll stay, not as someone I protect, but as someone I live for, then we are already a family." Her throat closed words beyond reach, so she simply held out her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger. Rosie squealed with delight, running forward to wrap her arms around both their legs. "We're together now," she said firmly, as if declaring law. The square erupted in applause, not staged, but genuine, and for once Wyatt did not stand apart from it. He let the town see him not only as sheriff, but as a man with something worth guarding beyond duty. That evening, as the sun dipped gold over the hills, the three of them sat on the porch. Rosie had fallen asleep, curled against Eva's lap. Wyatt leaned back, arm draped around Eva's shoulders, a quiet peace on his face. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter yellowed from years of being carried, but never read aloud. His voice, low and gravelly, broke the silence. "Elena," he said, using Hannah's full name, as if speaking to her across the years. "I once believed my heart had frozen. I thought losing you meant losing the rest of me. But this woman," he glanced at Ava, "she didn't ask for rescue or pity. She just sat in the cold until someone chose not to look away. She reminded me what you always knew, that love isn't fire or thunder. It's embers tended one by one until warmth returns." His hands shook slightly as he folded the letter and tucked it away. Eva rested her head against his shoulder, tears bright in her eyes, but her smile steady. In Frost Hollow, spring did not arrive in bursts of color. It came in quiet ways, buds that dared to bloom, children's laughter drifting down the street, and two people who had once lived in silence, now speaking without fear. Eva had stepped off a train, abandoned, unwanted, deceived. She found herself in a place that wasn't meant for her. But wrong turns sometimes lead to right lives. She hadn't come to Frost Hollow for a sheriff, a child, or a second chance. And yet, she had found all three. Under the wide sky, with Rosie asleep and Wyatt's arm firm around her, Eva finally understood she had not been claimed because she was never meant to be owned. She had been chosen. And in choosing each other, they had turned loss into belonging, silence into laughter, and frost into bloom. Love doesn't always arrive the way we expect. Sometimes it comes late, uninvited, in the wrong town, or in the coldest winter. But when it does, it reminds us that family is not fate, it's choice. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe for more tales of love, courage, and second chances on the untamed frontier.